Sanbonan Tumilang Abshenda. This is Unisani, Dr. Scruffy to some of you, and to some, Dr. Q. Whichever rocks your boat, go with it. I'm comfortable. So, I'm sitting here in Dakar, Senegal, and I am reminded that I owe you part 2 of the indigenous foods conversation. Remember, I had initially said I'm going to drop a 3-part series on indigenous foods and particularly contextualize it based on my experiences as an indigenous foods researcher. And so today I want to continue. I think the first episode was released about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, not longer than that. So today I'm continuing there. And this couldn't have happened at a better time than now, because I am actually here to join forces with like-minded individuals that want to promote, preserve, and manage, for a lack of a better term, our indigenous knowledges in Africa, But oftentimes when we talk about indigenous knowledges, our point of departure is usually around music, dances, languages, especially languages. But we don't often talk about ukudla, we don't often talk about food. And that bothers me. I'm thinking, when I go home, for instance, everybody in my community grows indigenous foods, or what other people refer to as traditional foods. Sometimes those are not even cultivated. They grow naturally from the wild. Imbuya, for instance, we all eat imbuya, amaranthus, and it grows naturally, and it is one of our superfoods. But we don't often have conversations around this, and it bothers me, and it will forever bother me. I still remember those of you that listened to the first part of this series. When I first moved to Durban, it was a struggle for me to relate with the lifestyle there, especially when it comes to the cuisines there in the city. I had to ask my grandmother, please, if there's somebody who is coming to Durban, mpatise, give a taxi driver something so that I'm able to eat. And I think that was an awakening moment for me, because a part of me felt like my identity has in a way been stripped away, or it has fallen short. It had fallen short. I still do feel the same way when I am unable to access some of the items that are close to the foods that I eat at home. I'll make an example. Right now, I live in Gqeberha, Port Elizabeth, as it was called previously. And in PE, whether you go to the slums, whether you are in the suburban parts or the townships, that space is very wide. It is absolutely wide. There is nothing that people could go to and point and say, this is our indigenous food. No, there isn't. At least not cultivated indigenous foods. The closest would be E22. E22 is imbuya. But not very many people consume that also. And you hardly find it in that space. So in PE, it's actually my second time residing in that city, and the first time, my goodness, I think that was the worst period of my life. If I were to relate this to food alone, coming back though, one had to make means of ensuring that they get food, and what I do now is I've got a lady. She's Zimbabwean. And they have their own indigenous foods. Now, this is the beauty of being African. There is nothing that is particularly unique to you. There will always be something similar. We see this even with languages. isiXhosa and isiZulu, they are almost similar. When she speaks Swahili, I can hear sometimes when she dresses ngendlela yakubo, I can see that that is an African way of dressing, you know? So even with food, when she brings me food from Zimbabwe, I kind of feel close to home. And that makes me happy. I get some sort of fulfillment, right? So the question for me has been, are our indigenous foods a part of our identity? And if they are, why is it that when we talk about indigenous knowledges, we often look at it from a point of, maybe our point of departure would be music. We talk about languages, we talk about our clothing, etc., etc. We don't talk as much about food as we do with all these other parts of indigenous knowledge. And again, it's a lingering question that I fail to understand. I fail to answer, rather. I'm thinking of the month of September. So we have Heritage Day in South Africa, and during that month, historically, oh mama, no gogo, everybody, community members and whoever, they would gather at a specific place with their chiefs, Neinduna, tribal authorities, and there would be dances, people would be dressed in their cultural regalia, and they would be singing amaculo esintu, traditional songs, and there would be dances. But in that, they would also be appreciating the harvest, you know, and there would be some form of trade that takes place in that space. Bartering system is what it was called back in the day, because we didn't use money. But then, fast forward to our current times, we don't see that happening. Even during September, we don't see that. And it begs a question, what is going to happen to my children? What are they going to be eating 30 years down the line? Am I comfortable with having my children eating Western foods and not so much their indigenous foods, something that is closely associated to their culture? I actually don't think so. Personally, I don't think so. We can have gourmet foods, we can have whatever Western foods on our plates, but I seriously don't think that the question around indigenous foods and the protection of our foods should be sidelined. I seriously think that something has to be done about ukudla kwesintu. We need to protect ukudla kwesintu at all cost. A thought that came to me earlier was, so we've become this westernized society that appreciates Western foods and Western ways of doing things, from our clothing to the languages that we speak. I'm speaking in English, by the way, and not using my mother tongue, which is a red flag. It is a red flag. And I ask myself, when I go home, or when many of us go home, we know ukuthi kunezindlu that are for our mkhulus, omkhulu, nkosi yami, ogogo, abantu abadala, our ancestors. And when you go and you speak there, whether there is some ceremonial thing going on ekhaya or whatever, you would have ukudla. But the food that you put there is not your Western food. It is your traditional foods. Which again sparks a question, Kumina. As an African child, why only value these when I have to go endaweni yabantu abadala and not value them to a point that I consume them on a daily basis? I guess this is more of a question more than a contribution from me today, because I don't think I can answer that question, to be quite honest. What are our ancestors even saying when they see us promoting Western foods and sidelining our indigenous foods? I don't know. It's seriously bothering me, and yeah, I'm gonna sound like I'm crazy today, but the question of indigenous foods and Western foods is something I fail to understand. I wish somebody could clarify for me, and yeah, I'm just gonna wait for somebody to say, actually, this is how things should be, and this is where we have gone wrong, and this is how we can correct our wrongs, And I even wonder if it is possible for us to reinvent the wheel, since we are in a space where when you open television, you find advertisements of Western foods. When you drive on the roads, billboards are full of Western foods. When you go to conferences, it's Western foods, etc., etc. I sit here from a point of not knowing, and a question I'm asking is, are these foods a part of our identity? And if they are, how do we bring them back on our plates? We speak farm to plate or farm to fork nowadays, those of you that are in the food space. But when we say farm to fork, we don't actually look at our indigenous foods. We look at Western foods. So how do we reach a point where we are producing and consuming our indigenous foods? Kanti yini le engaka edala ukuthi abantu bangakudli ukudla kwesintu? Where will we be in the next 50 years if we don't take care of our indigenous foods now, if we don't produce our indigenous foods now? Wena, for those of you that believe emadlozini, uzoba yidlozi elilethelwa ikabish emsamo. What can we do? Drop me your thoughts. Thank you very much.